It's my hopeless task to try to talk about U.S.-China relations. As it happens, in this talk, I'm going to talk about the China dream, a little bit maybe about Donald Trump's dream, about the demographics that are driving some of the questions that have to be answered. We've already touched on some of those, but also some of the hard choices. You may have thought I was joking when I said I had 130 slides. I wasn't. So there will be moments where this is going to seem like a movie. Okay, we're going to be flipping that quick. All right? But if you have questions and that sort of thing, please just go ahead and raise your hand and I'll try to deal with them at the moment. But we also need to hear from Tobias in just a bit as well. So we're going to have to plow forward. Again, all of these presentations will be available to you and to others via the web. Looking to China. And here, given the currency symbols, we're focusing on economics. And that is the subject of a lot of discussion. Because, of course, first of all, China is gigantic. The fastest growing large economy, already number 2. It will overtake the United States at some point. It hasn't yet. But the U.S.-China economic relationship has been very important as the ballast for our relationship. When we had troubles in other areas, the economic relationship helped to keep things moving forward. That's no longer the case. In fact, the biggest disputes right now revolve around economics. But the whole world, all of these different currencies, are paying attention to China. Okay, there we go. Okay, so who went to see Skyscraper? Raise your hand, please. Oh, Dwayne Johnson's going to be so disappointed. But the fact that you didn't raise your hand means that you are like most Americans who didn't go to see Skyscraper. This $125 million film with another $100 million to promote it didn't do that well on its opening weekend. Its opening weekend in North America, you can see $26 million. First couple of weeks that it was out, $47 million. But they were counting on somebody. They were counting on China. Oh, there we go. Counting on China. Because in its opening weekend in China, it made the same amount of money as it made in 2 weeks in the United States. China saved the Skyscraper. Okay? Or at least saved the career of the Hollywood executives that approved this movie, right? Now, this film, as it happens, always had China as its big audience. Partly because the company that made it, Legendary Pictures, is owned by Wanda, is owned by a Chinese company. And so they were calculating this all along. But don't rush out to see it. I've heard it's pretty bad. Now, how many of you have a Zhongxing, have a ZTE telephone? Anyone? Yeah. They actually had, at one point, 11% of the US phone market. And especially on the prepaid phones, that sort of thing that AT&T and Walmart and other companies sell, ZTE has been very big. And then what did they do? They sold these phones and technology in Iran and North Korea. That was a violation of sanctions. And the US punished them by saying, that's a problem. Don't do it again. And they did it again. And as a consequence, the US government said, no more American stuff for you. Now that's a problem, because half of the phones that ZTE makes use American chips. And all of the phones, all of the smartphones that ZTE make, use the Google Android operating system. So this was going to put this company out of business. They announced, we're stopping operations. Here's the employees. Tens of thousands of employees. In 2017, about 75,000. What we're told is that Xi Jinping mentioned to Deng Xiaoping, the guy has power, but not that much power. Mentioned to Donald Trump, you know, these are a lot of workers. This is a big company, tens of thousands of workers. And so Trump ordered the Commerce Department to work something out. And many of you know that ZTE agreed to pay a more than $1 billion fine to fire everybody at the top and to bring in American monitors. But this is in the news. This is part of the relationship. Phones that people are using. Most of those, when I mentioned that ZTE, about half of their phones use American chips, they're Qualcomm chips. And so in fact, one of the companies that would have been losing money if ZTE went out of business, at least in the short term, was Qualcomm, a San Diego-based company. Qualcomm has had its own problems in China, though. It was fined almost $1 billion for anti-competitive behavior. So they've had a rocky relationship. But it appears as though Qualcomm's effort to buy another company is a casualty of the trade war. The Chinese government has refused to approve that deal. And because so many Qualcomm chips are used in China, they needed Chinese approval in order to buy that company. $44 billion deal dead. And the Chinese say, well, it's not dead, we just haven't decided. But Qualcomm has already decided to give that money back to its shareholders, and it has to give $2 billion to the company they didn't ultimately consummate the relationship with. Now, California, where we're at today, is, of course, a big exporter. We're usually number one. Some years we're number two. What happened in the years when we're number two? Boeing sold a lot of planes. Okay? When China places a big order for Boeing aircraft, Washington is number one. But otherwise, California is the number one exporter. And you can see we export a lot of things, including something that you may not think of as an export. Cora mentioned 3.5, actually it's like 4 million visitors from China. That's considered an export. It's a fascinating thing because in this case, the export comes to us, right? That's an export. The 335,000 students studying in American universities, that's an export. Okay? And so we sell a lot in services, but also in goods. Communications equipment, those Qualcomm chips that we were talking about. But what's number two on the list? Waste and scrap. That's going to drop, though. China no longer wants our trash. It wants clean trash. And my friends, your trash is not clean enough. Okay? So less of this. I'm sorry? What's in the trash? What's clean trash? Trash that's not been adulterated. So it's got to be pristine plastic, metal, paper products. Okay? Motor vehicles. Navigational and measuring equipment. Motor vehicles includes Tesla. Right now, Tesla is China is Tesla's #2 market, and Tesla plans to build a factory there. But other things are in the news. This was a letter that the Chinese government, the aviation authority, sent to United Airlines and said, we've noticed that you have a problem with your website and with your apps. I have a problem with it too, but not the same problem. The problem is how you label Taiwan destinations. Oh. And the American government response was from Trump, this is Orwellian nonsense. I ran against political correctness. I'm not going to follow Chinese political correctness. They shouldn't force American companies to do this. This is an official White House statement. But sometime late last night, I went to the United website. And you can see the price and all of that sort of thing. But what I want to draw your attention to is my flight from Los Angeles to where? Taipei. Taipei exists just in space. Just in space. Well, if we look at other places, if we're flying from Kyoto, for example, what's it say? Kyoto, Japan, then the airport code. Okay, let's fly from Seoul. Oh, Seoul, Korea. You can't take United to Pyongyang yet. Okay. Mexico City, Mexico. Uh-oh. Taipei? No. No, it doesn't say China, does it? Beijing, though, what? I know where Beijing is. Apparently United chooses not to say. Because you'll see that what United did was what? For all of the Chinese destinations on the Chinese mainland and all of the Taiwanese destinations, no country. And so China said, you've got to put everything in China. United said, no, none of you get to go. None of you get to have a place, right? Well, what grade did the Chinese government give? Incomplete. American Airlines doesn't have this problem because they don't fly to Taiwan. Delta has this problem. And so Delta is also dealing with this. Delta actually asked for an incomplete grade. They said, it's harder than you think. In any case, these things come up. These things come up. Now, this has been the practice on these websites for years and years, but they've come up now. And not just the United States, but all foreign carriers have been required to change their websites. So if you're from Australia or from other places. And the United States was the holdout for a while, in part because the White House labeled this request as it did. We're going to shift gear dramatically. The first points that I wanted to make is that China is very much in the news. And the US-China relationship is very much in the news, and on a high stakes level. Why did United change its website? Well, it probably doesn't affect peace across the strait, but it affects what? It affects their ability to carry potentially 7 million travelers, right, from China to the United States and from the United States to China. They want as much of that business as they can get, and if they are not permitted to go because of names, they want to avoid that. At the same time, they also want to avoid completely capitulating to Beijing. So we're going to shift gears for a second and talk about kind of the climate in China. Now, so if you went back, this program focuses on China now, but we can't really get much mileage out of China now if we don't appreciate where China was, right? Well, 44 years ago, there was a movement to criticize Lin Biao and to criticize Confucius. Okay, here's some posters from that. Here's some demonstrations. So could have been your students who were, part of the demonstration here. And I want to draw your attention to the archetypes that are represented by our students here. And also in these kinds of posters. Who's represented here? Devin's going to be talking with you about textual literacy and things like that, but we also need to be visually literate. What? Workers
in the army.
Yeah, we got workers, okay, sledgehammer, peasants, soldiers, the Holy Trinity, right? And here they are criticizing Confucius, and Confucius here has been labeled the #1 bad egg. Okay. Fast forward 40 years to the 2,565th birthday for Confucius. Did you get him something? Xi Jinping did. Xi Jinping gave a speech at this conference saying what? We have always been peace-loving. It is in our genetic makeup to be peace-loving. And this love of peace is rooted in Confucianism. So 40 years ago, criticize Confucius. Today, celebrate Confucius. Where can you find Confucius? Well, you can find him in New York, right? You can find him at Cal State Los Angeles, and you can even find him in Texas, in Houston. He gets around. One way that he's getting around is through the 100 or so Confucius Institutes that exist across the United States, including a couple here in California. San Francisco State, UCLA, San Diego State have Confucius Institutes. Why the name Confucius? Now, this is not just the United States, it's worldwide, but why do you think the Chinese government, when they said, we want to encourage people to study Chinese and we want to encourage people to better understand Chinese culture, why choose the name Confucius? Was Mao Zedong Institute already taken? They could have chosen the most famous Chinese. Who's that? Now, this is an interesting question. Who's the most famous Chinese? Okay, maybe Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan Institute. Okay, the problem with Jackie Chan is he's still alive, right? And naming things after people who are still alive is a little bit risky. But they could have gone with Bruce Lee, okay? Or, in Houston at least, it could have been the Yao Ming Institute, right? But they went with Confucius. Confucius being offered up because, of course, the name Confucius is universally known. And so we've got a film about Confucius, and there's a love interest in the film. If you read the analects carefully, you may not find that story. I encourage you to try, okay? And of course, we have this, famous actor, the star, one of the stars of Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, here playing the role of Confucius. And here he kowtows to the screenwriter, his teacher, right, for this. So Confucius gets around. He even gets around near Tiananmen Square. He was planted in front of the History Museum, a gigantic statue, and then he wasn't. Gone. And there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not there was an ideological dispute over whether or not, because there are no other statues on Chang'an. You've got Mao looking down and no other statues. You're going to put Confucius sort of looking across at Mao? So he was moved. But there are celebrations now in Changchun and across China of Confucius. What's going on? As recently as this spring, we have Xi Jinping, the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, saying what? We've had some great figures in our past. We've had Lao Tzu, we've had Confucius, we've had Zhuangzi, we've had Mengzi, Mozi, it goes on, right? And so here, the leader of the Chinese Communist Party emphasizing the past. 40 years ago, rejecting that past. What's that about? He's not talking about the contributions of Marx, although he did it when Marx had a birthday. What's going on? Let's look at the money. 1953, who's featured on that currency? Farmers. Farmers, right? And doing well, apparently. The grain is coming in. 12 years later, new currencies issued. Who's there? Who's on the money? Not Mao. Not Mao. Who's on the money? No, not Zhou and Lai. Boy, this is interesting. Yeah, no, we got the Holy Trinity. Okay? We've got workers, we've got peasants, we've got soldiers, and then behind them, different ethnic groups, right? So again, emphasizing who? Ordinary people. Ordinary people. The people who make change. That's what they're arguing here. On the 50 cent, on the Wu Mao note, what is on that? What's on that? Yeah, it's a factory. It's a textile mill. That was being celebrated. That was different from today. The change began in the late 80s, where you had these 4 Communist Party leaders. One of them only recently rehabilitated, Liu Shaoqi, and you've got Zhu De, Zhou Enlai, and Mao. So what happened in 1987? Okay, we're not going to talk so much about those workers, peasants, soldiers. Who are we going to emphasize here? The Communist Party leaders who we want to remember. Now, this is during Deng Xiaoping's period. He could have put his own picture on the money. He didn't. He didn't. And then 12 years later, I said that we should name the institute, the workshop here, China Always. Now it's pretty much Mao Always, everywhere. If you've got money in your pocket, Mao's there. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean? What might that mean? What could you do with students, asking them, for example, to compare the currency that they may be most familiar with, Apple Pay, or the currency from China? Who gets on the money and why? Right? We joke in America about dead presidents plus Hamilton and Franklin, right? That sort of thing. In Japan, you have a couple of people who were important in bringing foreign ideas into Japan. Who's on the money in China? Mao. The Communist Party has done away with much of Mao's economic thinking, but there's still elevating him in a way that didn't happen when he was alive. He wasn't on the currency. Well, let me ask you to shift gears one more time. We'll do that a lot. This is the official China Dream website. Okay. Xi Jinping thought that China needed some kind of overarching message, goal. They were already going to the moon, so that was taken. Already doing so much. But what did he put forward? He said a China dream or a Chinese dream. It's translated both ways. What is that dream? Well, at various times they've said there's 1.4 billion dreams. Everybody has his or her own dream. But what about the China dream? The China dream is very much, of course, about what the Chinese call the rejuvenation of the nation, the return to China's traditional position at the head of the civilization chart, the most advanced, most accomplished country. Now, the rejuvenation is possible because of 110 very bad years, right? China needs to be rejuvenated because from 1839 to 1949, the world pushed China around. That's the official narrative. And in fact, this is a museum dedicated to it with a rather large sign for the door. Okay? This museum in Shenyang is devoted to National Humiliation Day. You might want to put it on your calendar. We don't have National Humiliation Day. Some people think it's April 15th when we pay taxes, but it isn't. It isn't. China's National Humiliation Day is tied to the invasion of China in 1931 by Japan, the occupation of Manchuria. And school children are taught, never forget national humiliation. So that's part of the story, is that the world pushed us around, but we are back. And the China dream is about being back. This is what back means. 1750, and so you can argue with these numbers, and people do. 1750 to 1900. And what this chart purports to show is it's an index. So it's not numbers meaning X number of dollars. It's a share of total world manufacturing output. Now in 1750, there is no United States, right? Not yet. And we were a manufacturing superpower, weren't we? With all of 0.1% of total world manufacturing. Now, there's ships being made, there's stuff going on, but there's not many people. Where was the center of world manufacturing in 1750? China and India. More than half of total output in these two giant places. India, of course, at this time is not a unified state, and it's soon to be taken over by the British. But China, by itself, 1/3. Anyone know today about what China's share of world GDP is? How about what the United States share is? Together, the two of us account for about 1/3 of total GDP, the two countries combined, with the United States being the larger of the two for the moment. But look what happens. It's not that Chinese people stopped making things, it's that the rest of the world industrialized. Not the rest of the world, but obviously Western Europe and North America. And we see that rapid rise as a relative share. And so the China dream is getting back to 1750, which happens to be Hai Qing dynasty. So, I'm sorry, 4 big aims for the China dream. A strong China, a China that cannot be pushed around by anybody. A civilized China, a cultured place where people treat each other well. A harmonious China, where you don't have ferocious disputes. A beautiful China, a China that is clean and green. These are the 4 big aims that Xi Jinping has articulated for that China dream. Well, how does this fit with the United States? Can the United States be part of the China dream? Can the United States contribute to it? Something to look at. How is China to realize this dream? Well, clearly, they're using a Leninist party state. So the Communist Party, which is guided very much by the principles that Lenin used in organizing the Bolsheviks, highly centralized, very disciplined, trying to make it a very effective ruling force, having the party state permeate every corner with Chinese characteristics. And those characteristics speak to allowing for certain freedoms that didn't exist when Mao was alive. Certain freedoms that Lenin wouldn't have imagined. I got a sign about how many minutes I have left. My math isn't great, but at roughly 50 slides a minute, we'll be okay. Part of realizing the China dream is through the Belton Road. Now, I spoke actually at this same spot about the Belton Road last time, so I'm not going to dwell on it here, except to emphasize its emphasis on infrastructure. And Scott mentioned that 6-lane road going out to Ankang and all of these kinds of places. China does infrastructure like nobody does infrastructure, right? Bringing other countries on board. American companies want to participate. Here's one such company. They're participating in building the Beijing airport, the Chengdu airport. They want to be part of that. Here we've got Caterpillar and others wanting to be part of this. So American companies see some opportunity on Belton Road. But of course, the American government has had a different perspective at various times. When she was Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton warned African nations about taking Chinese money, that it came with certain responsibilities that they may not want. And in fact, things have happened. The Chinese now control this port because the Sri Lankans could not pay their debt. And this port is going to be important for protecting China's shipments of oil that have to go through the South China Sea, which happens to be an area that I'd very much like to get to, and it's only 60, 70 slides away. Let's see if we can do something. Here I need some help to the next slide. Yep.
Regardless of all the prejudice in the
Gotta
past,
turn it up.
today I want to restore the impression you have of my country, China, which happened exactly February.
You can move. Feel free to dance.
I made it for such a long time. As an individual citizen, based in the southwest of a country, I want to spit it in. You guys can know better about what the truth is in. How Chinese people since our own country. Now how much we don't want to be disputing. First things first, we all know that China's a developing country. It has large population and it's really hard to manage, especially after World War II almost perished. I mean, what I say is true, war is always scary. It is real that the pollution is severe at the present stage. In big cities like Beijing, Tianjin, always pollution haze. Similar in the 1950s, London, LA, it is painful with how growth rate you see. People are too busy with business. Everybody wanna have a better life, make money, get married. But they're like the first and second generation of rich, not well educated. But now young men like us, aspiring and friendly.
This is China, we love the country with the trend phenomenon, the red dragon and the evil but a peaceful place, the beautiful land, we're rich cultural name. This is China, we love the country with the trend phenomenon, the red dragon and the evil but a peaceful place, the beautiful.
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you. You want to see the whole thing, don't you? Yeah. Me too. Me too. This is a propaganda video. What was the first clue? It was in English. Okay? And, of course, CCTV, that whole thing. But this is a Chinese group, and you could download this, as I did, from YouTube. And they're talking about real problems, but they're proud of their country. And so these are the millennials that I wanted to dwell on. And he says, we know about our problems, about pollution, and he then digs my hometown of Los Angeles and says, yeah, you guys are messed up too. But they're emphasizing their pride and their optimism, you know, that sort of thing. I don't have time to show you the whole thing. It ends, though, with a panda, which for me is kind of the single best example of a stereotype that you can reach for, right? Every art director, magazine cover director, pandas and Mao. What's the third? I'm sorry? Bamboo? Yeah, bamboo might be another. Great Wall, yeah, we got them, okay? People reaching for these symbols, that sort of thing. But again, this is a Chinese group doing it. Here's somebody who never claimed to be the voice for his generation, Han, dropout, okay? So he has done okay despite his lack of education. Best-selling author, he was the #1 blogger when blogs were a thing, and race car driver, and now, of course, movie director. And his blog, though, some parts of it have been translated into English, and you might want to get that and use it with your students. It's very thoughtful. It's called This Generation. This Generation. And he's talking about this. And he's not very happy with many people in his generation. He says it's easy to bash Japan, but why don't you do something for our society here? Well, I'm going to skip over this. As much as I know you love charts and math. The key point here, China's millennial generation, the Balingho, Zhoulingho generation, is the third largest country on the planet. Third after India and what's left of China. Okay, 400 million people. And so our focus in this workshop are changing lives. These are the lives that have already undergone change. And these are the lives that the country is depending on. US, similar sorts of story. But what does China have? China is growing much slower. Again, Scott mentioned that the 2020 census isn't in, but in the first decade of the 21st century, China's growth rate cut in half. Cut in half. Fewer young people, more older people. Soon, China will have more people over age 65 than the United States has people. Okay, we're talking about the challenge of taking care of our elderly. Imagine everyone. Now, there are economists who argue that China is lucky that it didn't get rich, didn't become affluent, didn't become a high-income country before it got old. The argument is older people in China are used to doing with less. They haven't gotten used to an affluent lifestyle, and so maybe they won't break the bank. I think that's optimistic because I see the Chinese travelers. But millennials will have to take care of that aging population. China needs to continue to change its economy more in the direction of services. It's already predominantly services anyway, but it needs to move to higher end kinds of services. That has to happen. You have incredible disparity. Some of the world's poorest people live in China, and of course some of the world's richest, and sometimes in that same city. So this is a big issue. China is as unequal as the United States is. And China, of course, has terrible environmental problems. So betting on these millennials is a big bet. Now, so when 20 some odd years ago, when I was living in this town, this was the high-tech production, making pajamas. And that's what young people from the countryside did. And you didn't need much education to make that work. But you need to be stronger when you're working in higher tech sorts of things. And now, even those jobs don't exist, right? China is the #1 consumer of robots, which is why robotics is on the list of things that China wants to be a dominant player in by 2025, the so-called Made in China 2025 mission statement, to dominate in robotics, to dominate in artificial intelligence. There are specific targets. What size of market share? How many companies should be in the top 10 in these industries? China's doing this because it feels it has to. It has to. Now, Scott's already made some discussion of the expansion of education. When I taught in China from 82 to 85, that's at that left end of that graph, there were fewer college students in China as there were in California. Now, many more college students. They've invested heavily in education. There's a big bet being made. We haven't gotten to North Korea, we haven't gotten to the South China Sea, haven't talked about so many issues. But let me conclude with these last couple slides about how millennials see the US-China relationship. Now, this information, unfortunately, is dated. China stopped allowing the kinds of questions that the Pew Research Group used to hire a Chinese polling company to ask. And so getting opinions now is more complicated. It's always complicated, but we used to have more data. So the blue is Chinese people looking at America. The yellow is American people looking at China. And you can see what? You can see, first of all, where's the 50% line? Right? 50%. So favorable, right? Somewhat unfavorable. We're going in the wrong direction up here, right? Americans having a more negative attitude towards China. Now that's improved slightly as the American economy has improved, but still. But there's one group of people in both countries that's more optimistic, and that's the group that's under age 30. Some people might say, well, they're naive. They don't have much experience. That's why they don't see the other country negatively. On the other hand, they tend to be the people who are most curious about these other places. So you can see more than half of young people in both countries see the other country more favorably. And as you get older, what happens? You become less optimistic, less favorable. That's an issue. On the American side, it may be tied to Tiananmen, which is a long time ago. This institute is named the 1990 Institute to talk about a way forward. But Tiananmen had a big impact on what Americans thought about China. That was a long time ago, and those people who are under 30, only the oldest of them were even alive then. Okay? But it had an impact. But you can see that older Chinese also tend to think of the United States much more negatively. So it's not just our two countries that have to depend on millennials to save us economically and to provide for us in our when we need that help. It's also that they're the ones that the relationship may depend on. Now, in which of those two countries does the under 30 population have a great deal of political influence? Which of the two? United States? Maybe, maybe not. Donald Trump isn't president if young people decided that, right? In fact, what we see with Brexit, what we see with the election of Trump, is the elderly asserting themselves. In China, do young people have political influence? My argument here, that was a trick question, is that in neither country are young people politically powerful. And you might say that as they get older, maybe they'll get less favorably inclined towards the other country. We don't know. Okay. This has nothing to do with U.S.-China relations, but it's where we'll end. Traditionally in China, these 24 exemplars have been held up as demonstrating xiao, filial piety. Filial piety, this very important part of many Chinese traditions, including Confucianism. And so you've got these examples of kids who did important things to save their father from a tiger, all kinds of things. People cut off flesh and make soup out of it, all kinds of stuff. Well, what about for the new generation? Yeah, the government's on it. China has a whole new set of 24 things, 24 model behaviors that the young should do for the elderly. And it's actually not, I could only grab the top part. My favorite one of these is watch a movie with grandma. Watch a movie with grandma. Make sure it's a movie she wants to watch. Don't take her to see Skyscraper. Thank you. So, okay, maybe I should actually go through some of these things that worry people. Financial scams. Bernie Madoff has all kinds of Chinese cousins with various Ponzi schemes, food and drug scandals. Here we're emptying out Hong Kong of milk powder because of the melamine scandal in 2007, 2008. Have those ongoing, the current scandal regarding vaccines. Xiao Yueye, this is the 2-year-old who was run over in Foshan in Guangdong province, and 17 people walked by her and she was run over a second time. Only this older woman who collected things to be recycled, only she stopped. We have this on CCTV. The little girl passed away and people were outraged. Who are we? Young people, older people. Then I was going to talk about facial recognition, where you can go and shop at KFC and pay with your face. Yeah, China is pretty high tech in certain areas. Okay, we have to stop. If you'll get all 130 slides, good luck understanding them.